Professor Camilla Naidu, Executive Dean, Faculty of Humanities. Professor Thembisa Waetjen, our inductee today. Dr. Kumisho Mukhwerane, our respondent, historian and award-winning author of Murifi, Person, Family and Nation in Colonial Bechuanaland, 1880s to 1950s. Senior leaders of the university, members of Senate and other academics, distinguished guests, students who are here, and all those who are joining us online. Good evening, Huyenant, Dumelang, Tobela, Sanbonan. It is indeed a great honor and special privilege for me to welcome you to the Professorial Inauguration Lecture of Professor Thembisa Waetjen. As I do so, I wish to express a warm welcome to her and colleagues. This is indeed a proud and joyful, yet a landmark moment for all of you, for Professor Waetjen, for us here at UJ, for higher education in South Africa and beyond. This is particularly noteworthy as we celebrate 20 years of UJ this year. Since the merger in 2005, we have come to exemplify how excellence and access are not mutually exclusive in higher education. In the spirit of innovation and social responsibility, UJ has pushed boundaries and prioritized research, technological advancement, and community engagement. It is against this backdrop that we welcome you into the Professorate Thembisa, a community of scholars dedicated to UJ's ethos of academic excellence while making a tangible impact on society. The inauguration of professors is a public ceremony in which newly appointed professors are inducted into office by the Vice Chancellor and deliver their inaugural addresses. The ceremony has its roots in the medieval university and serves a multiple of purposes. First, it is an expression of welcome and an entry for new professors joining the circle of colleagues who are already professors. Secondly, it provides a platform for professors to display their expertise in the discipline and showcase their research. In the colonial traditions subscribed to by many universities, assuming the role of professor refers to the gown and the cap. Once we have listened to the inaugural address, the gown denoting the professorship will formally be assumed. Today, we gather to witness Professor Thembisa Waetjen's entry into the illustrious community of scholars at our university. It celebrates her contributions to the discipline and ultimately her impact on society. Professors provide a university with its identity, character, academic legitimacy, and integrity. The inaugural lecture is a rite of passage following the confirmation of the appointment of a person as a professor. This evening, we will listen to Professor Thembisa Waetjen as the gown goes to town. By this, I mean that the power of the inaugural address is when the expertise is showcased beyond the corridors of the university and reverberates with society. In the past, several philosophers and scholars have defined universities using very narrow conceptualizations. For example, the search for truth, for universal knowledge, and even as instruments serving the purpose of the economy or being utilitarian in nature. Through our work and research at UJ, I hope that we can break out of these narrow conceptualizations and reflect on the university as contributing to public good, working towards societal impact. What is the role of the intellectual then? Edward Said, in one of his articles, defines the role of the intellectual as one who commands a vast knowledge of a specific discipline, one who is rigorous in the analysis of literature, who views being an intellectual as a vocation, and who functions as a kind of public memory to recall what is forgotten or ignored, to make the connections that are otherwise hidden, to provide alternatives for mistaken policies. It remains then for us as a university with a Pan-African vision to derive our mandate as intellectuals and as professors. And importantly, how do we embrace the role of a professor as a disruptor while continuing to be flagship careers of our disciplines? This evening, we will listen to Professor Thembisa Waetjen as one further step in the journey of being a professor. This is a journey which does not conclude once this lecture has been given. Notwithstanding, this inaugural lecture does create an opportunity for self-reflective pause in the journey of the professor. Let me now invite the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Camilla Naidu, to introduce Professor Thembisa Waetjen. Professor Naidu, I thank you.
Good evening, Sunny Bonani, Dumelang, Goeienaand. Vice-Chancellor Functionary Dr. Ralipata, Prof. Thembisa Waetjen, our inductee, Dr. Komishu Mukharani, our discussant, Dr. Malloy, Head of Department of History, and all the other historians here today, Prof. Ghulam Vahed, Prof. Jerry Murray. I can't name all of you today, but you are most welcome, colleagues, guests, students, and friends, all protocols observed. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Prof. Thembisa Waetjen. Thank you all for being here to celebrate this wonderful occasion. The person we know as Thembisa Waetjen was born Mary Ann Waetjen. She became Thembisa in 1979 when she joined her father, who took a sabbatical in South Africa and then spent time at the multiracial South African Federal Theological Seminary in what was then known as Natal, my old province. In the 1980s, between periods of study, she served as an activist for the civic initiative-based sanctuary movement, and this involved moving Central American refugees across the Mexico-US border, a mix of clandestine and transparent actions dedicated to holding the United States government accountable as a signatory to UN protocols and the Geneva Conventions. That is very important work at that stage. Thembisa subsequently joined a research team documenting war displacement in Mexico and Central America. This motivated a return to further education. Her focus was border politics, human mobility, and the violence of nationalisms. Her first book, published by the University of Illinois Press, examined ethnic nation building in the case of Inkatha. From 2002, in different capacities, she joined history at UKZN, a vibrant department that hosted the renowned History and African Studies seminar. As her research interests moved towards social history and cultural politics, she undertook a set of fruitful collaborations with UKZN colleagues. With Prof. Ghulam Wahed, who's here, she wrote 3 books exploring Indian Ocean Muslim migrant lives in Durban. With Julie Parley, she helped to pioneer pharmaceutical humanities research focusing on the political, cultural circulations, regulations, and consumptions of specific drug substances in her own focus on opium and cannabis. Her publications appear as various book chapters and academic articles in high-impact journals. Thembisa edited the multidisciplinary book Opiates in South Africa, Towards a Politics of Harm Reduction. This was published by the HSRC in 2019. She has co-edited 2 recent special journal issues on drug histories in Southern decolonial perspectives. In 2017, Thembisa was happy to join history at the University of Johannesburg. She supervises students in medical and drug histories. She has raised external funding for research, workshops, and postgraduate students from the NRF and the Wellcome Trust. In October 2023, she was promoted to professor. In 2024, she was awarded a B2 NRF rating. She has also recently received several teaching awards, including the UJ Faculty of Humanities Teaching Innovation Award in 2021, the UJ Vice Chancellor's Award for Teacher Excellence in 2023, and I'm very proud to say the National University Teaching Award, NUTA, in 2024, and I think you can give her a round of applause for that. Her teaching includes modules in research methods, drugs, medicines, and addiction, and first-year level early global history. For the latter, during the COVID-19 period, she created a collaborative class project that involved undergraduates in the construction of digital archive building using Omeka software, collecting images and text to represent local experiences of the pandemic. Thembisa is a fabulous colleague to work with. She has made an incredible contribution as a teacher and a scholar and is highly regarded by students and academics alike. We now call upon Prof. Thembisa Waetjen to offer an inaugural address. May we welcome her with a warm round of applause.
Colleagues, friends, postgraduate students, acting vice chancellor, dean, all of you here, thank you for coming. Thank you for those at home who are watching from far away. It means a great deal to me. In the year 1913, a Pretoria psychiatric physician named Charles Borehill submitted a thesis for a Doctor of Medicine degree from the University of Edinburgh. It proposed to lay out the evils of cannabis consumption by African colonial subjects in South Africa. The analysis is suffused with colonial logic. One of Borehill's aims was to speak against a rising moral panic among settlers about dacha, which after 1910 and the Union was being linked to crime. In Borehill's view, dacha smoking was a benign cultural practice that could be accommodated by segregation, contained within the so-called native reserves and regulated under African patriarchal authority. To demonstrate the relative harmlessness of dacha, Borehill exhibited evidence in the form of a praise poem dedicated to the Basotho royal house, transcribed both in Sesotho and English. It begins with a prologue. We consume it and we remember the miracles of the world. We remember the people. We remember those near and those far. We remember. The thing consumed here is dacha, smokable cannabis, and what will be remembered through the main body of the poem are specific events. The successful stand by King Moshesh in 1868 against Free State Commandant Le Wepenar at Taba Basu. It eulogizes the king's bravery and power against colonial encroachment. Charles Borehill, perhaps ironically, makes no comment about the anti-colonial content of the praise poem. His anthropology renders it politically innocuous, a quaint custom that he termed a dacha incantation. But of course, if we read against the grain of Borehill's own agenda, we can perceive that the poet here is invoking dacha as an aid to historical memory. Dacha's value within the performance of the poem is in augmenting the capacity of listeners to remember and to belong. Dacha invokes a shared political consciousness through connection with those near and those far, those living and those dead. It summons time, but also timelessness in the experience of history telling. This source fragment from 1913 offers a glimpse of the plurality of cannabis meanings in South Africa 10 years before it was defined and prohibited and fixed in national law as a drug. Since the turn of the 20th century, authoritative knowledge about the substances we habitually call drugs emerged synchronically with the rise of modern medical diagnostics and the criminal justice system. Recognized expertise about drug consumption today remains vested in these two systems. Academic history calls upon a different way of knowing. It seeks to unsettle the rote certainties of positivist methods. Historians focus on the changing ontologies that accrue to different forms of matter, including drug objects, across time and space. Between 1927 and 1934, the German philosopher Walter Benjamin, with some of his friends, conducted experiments using cannabis, opium, and mescaline to explore their effects on thinking and consciousness. Benjamin kept a record of his drug encounters. He noted down fragments of thoughts and conversations, the scenes, sounds, words, things, and gestures that he observed while intoxicated. In relation to ordinary objects, such as an ornamental vase, a lace curtain, the space between an easel and the staircase, Benjamin began to recognize a crucial aspect of the material world, which he called aura. More than a physical luminosity, aura radiated as a perception of an object's social life. It emanated both from the associations which tend to cluster around it and from the processes and events that constituted its unique existence. Benjamin explained the aura of an object as the presence of its historicity, tangible against the classifications and replications. This concept of aura was among the theoretical yields of Benjamin's psychoactive experiments. It informs his Arcades project and appears in other writing. In his essay on some motifs in Baudelaire, for example, he reflects on how an object's aura acts upon human memory. How we remember our own past may be confounded by our intellect, but become unmistakably present in some material object, or the sensation that that object arouses in us, released by the scent of a flower, the taste of a cake, the notes of a melody. These experiences render the past as an immediate sensation, as if existing outside of historical time, as if all times are one. In this sense, material objects are keepers of history. Their power arises as if by chance, dreamlike. Yet Benjamin insists that we can sustain our awareness of the past's imprint on everyday life, on the historicity of all things. The methodology he has in mind is nothing other than aura. Experience of the aura, he says, rests on the transposition of a response common in human relationships to the relationship between the inanimate or natural object and the human. In academic history, we call this methodology historical imagination, an analog to certain forms of psychoactivity. In 1998, an 8-year-old child is sleeping and dreaming. In this dream, he is on the edge of a river, which emerges from a cave between snow-covered banks. Flowing downstream and past him in the water's current are numerous objects. They come into focus as different medieval stringed instruments: a mandolin, a harp, a clavichord. He stands transfixed by an awareness of their potential for creating music, and then is overwhelmed by anxiety for their imminent loss as dulcimer, viola, and cello float on and away. He rushes along the bank, alone, scrambling, trying to rescue the drowning possibilities of their beauty. In his dream, the phenomenon has a name. It's called the loot rush. He wakes in a state of distress, calls for his mother, and recounts his dream to her. Blue of my heart, slow blue love, wrote Derek Jarman, the British artist and filmmaker, in his 1993 meditation of the color blue. Hospitalized with AIDS, Jarman had only months to live. He recounts that the arrival in Europe of the South Asian pigment indigo caused political consternation. Indigo was an exotic and luminous alternative to the locally grown woad plant for dyeing garments blue. Its adversaries called it the devil's dye. A formal decree prohibited its use. In France, dyers were required to take oaths not to use indigo. And for 2 centuries, indigo was hedged with legislation, writes Jarman. Fentanyl tablets are the color of the sky, of melancholy, of blood without oxygen. In 2016, the United States loosened its de minimis tariff regulations, and any posted packages containing contents worth less than $800 could now enter the country duty-free. This made it cheap to ship goods to the US. Chemicals produced in China moved under the United States Customs radar with new ease, including the precursor ingredients required to make the drug substance fentanyl. These arrived by air in New Jersey, California, Texas, Florida, Arizona, much of it transported southward into Mexico, where syndicated or freelance cooks cheaply produced fentanyl with rudimentary equipment. Fentanyl product is then shipped back north to its main market in the United States. As the Pulitzer Prize-winning Reuters journalist team proved through experimental transactions, in 2024, $3,600 could buy everything needed to make 3 million M30 pills, conservatively estimated at a street value of $3 million. Fentanyl is at least 50 times stronger than heroin, and overdose poisoning is epidemic in the US, with nearly 75,000 confirmed deaths for 2022 and 2023, the most recent data available. Fentanyl is currently the top cause of death of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45. Once the chemicals are mixed with filler and blue pigment, it is pressed into tablets and stamped with the insignia of a prescription pharmaceutical, typically the opioid oxycodone. The average pill contains 2 milligrams of fentanyl, a potentially lethal dose, but quantities vary from between 0.01 milligrams and 8.4 milligrams per tablet. Recent tweaks to the chemistry of fentanyl have produced even more potent analogs, such as carfentanil, 100 times more potent than regular fentanyl. Additives, too, are continually changing and can be similarly lethal but chemically quite distinct, such as the alpha-2 adrenergic receptor agonists xylazine and medetomidine, substances invented as animal tranquilizers. To speak about a lethal substance like fentanyl is to excite fears that tend already to glow around the word drug like a limbic aura. But in every moment in history, it is social alchemy as much as a drug's molecular architecture that produces danger. The word drug has disserviced us by convening into a single category very different kinds of substances. This has not prevented those in power from legislating distinctions. For example, where my whiskey and my cigarettes are signs of my sophistication, while your cannabis, your peyote, and your opium are menacing proof of your depravity. South African newspapers created panic, decade after decade, the same alarm, a drug blamed for all manners of social ills, like crime, insanity, or violence. The language is invariably religious, a drug attributed with evil chemistry, which, like a malevolent spirit, takes possession of its victims, entering a body to transform it as an agent of disorder and crisis. Such media panic is infused into the liberal language of policy that frames addiction as enslavement and existential unfreedom. As every drug historian has demonstrated again and again, in every modern context, drug objects awaken existing prejudices. They fuel racist and xenophobic politics. They stigmatize the vulnerable, a climate of fear facilitating the ambitions of would-be power seekers who promise tough solutions. Walter Benjamin was writing as fascism rose around him. Under the Nazis, imperialist war emerged as a political aesthetic, ideals of progress sacrificing evanescent aura to the messianic ends of nationalist uniformity. Technologies of aggression naturalized the use of human material as strategic objects, directing a human stream into a bed of trenches. Through gas warfare, Benjamin argued, the aura is abolished in a new way. Pharmaceutical poisons accompany an array of hazards delivered to the earth and its inhabitants through war, industrial production, mineral extraction, smelting, nuclear power, data storage, fossil fuel, radiation, DDT, mustard gas, lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, cyanide, sulfides, silica, asbestos. From the 1970s until just a few years ago, helicopters sprayed glyphosate herbicides over cannabis crops and over the land, water sources, and animals and people in the Eastern Cape, militarizing South Africa's war on drugs. From early centuries, healers employing the natural extract derived from the opium poppy well understood its properties, indicated for dysentery, pulmonary diseases, insomnia, and all kinds of physical pain. An opioid acts upon a specific part of our brain and spinal cord called mu receptors, which bind to opioid molecules, relieving pain and easing and slowing down the respiratory system. Too much will stop breathing for good. An individual may become habituated to it, requiring increased quantities to replicate initial effects. Terminating its use provides specific symptoms that can be agonizing. This set of dynamics has been termed addiction. The word drug, like the substance, is a pharmacon, at once a medicine and a poison, possessing power both to heal and to kill. A pharmacon brokers social boundaries, and a host of gatekeepers rush to decide who amongst us shall be restored to vitality and who condemned to drink hemlock. In 1940, Walter Benjamin, now stateless, moved between points of refuge in France in his flight from Nazi capture. He brought with him a lethal amount of morphine. After crossing the Pyrenees, he found that the Spanish border, and thus his safe passage to the United States, was closed to him. Seeing no escape, he used the morphine to take his life. It's 2009 in Durban. She waits in a plastic chair outside the emergency room. The physician comes to gently assure her that her son has been resuscitated. It's easy to bring someone back with naloxone, he explains, provided they receive this opiate antagonist in time. The hard part happens after release from the hospital. She knows this from experience, and this is the second accidental overdose in 3 days. He remains in the night in intensive care. She's allowed briefly to visit, finds and removes a spoon and syringe from his pocket. The nursing sister makes no attempt to hide her disgust. Why would anyone do that to themselves? Across 200 years, laboratories transformed opium, isolating alkaloids and creating new products. In 1803, morphine, later codeine. Towards the end of the 19th century, morphine was synthesized with blenacetic anhydride to create diamorphine, or heroin. In the 1930s, the German pharmaceutical company IG Farben synthesized the opioid pethidine, marketed by the brand name Demerol. Another German company, Grunenthal, notorious for its teratogenic drug thalidomide, synthesized tramadol. Fentanyl was also a laboratory product created for palliative treatment in cases of terminal illness and extreme physical pain. Fentanyl belongs to the phenylpiperidine class of compounds. In 1959, Dr. Paul Janssen of the Janssen Pharmaceutical Laboratories in Belgium began publishing on experiments with the piperidine molecular ring in combination with others to produce analgesic effects. Across this chronology of innovation, there were familiar patterns. Until they were proved terribly wrong, producers of each opioid product claimed that their new synthesis carried less risk of addiction than earlier analogs. Each drug entered into informal markets outside of regulatory oversight. These illegal circulations necessarily rely upon the facilitation by formal official actors, an inexorable phenomenon masked as an externality by the term corruption. In 1904, after the South African War, the government of the Transvaal under British imperial rule organized the transport of 63,000 men from northeastern China for indentured labor in the gold mines. Johannesburg pharmacists rushed to supply them with opium, importing many tons of the drug over 5 years. The pre-Union state responded initially with legal prohibition, and opium quickly flourished as a lucrative criminal trade, its supply chain facilitated by medical professionals, police, railway personnel, and customs agents. As addiction began to affect gold production, the state now legislated a system of opium supply to many hundreds of Chinese gold miners. In 1910, these now addicted men were repatriated, their addiction officially explained not as an effect of Transvaal political economy, but as proof of racial weakness and inferiority. In 1971, the apartheid state began passing drug control laws that were among the harshest in the world. They incorporated legal clauses from the infamous 1963 anti-terrorism laws, which provisioned indefinite detention without trial for purposes of interrogation. In this way, South Africa's war on drugs was launched in tandem with Richard Nixon's disastrous American campaign of drug suppression. Under the South African law, Parliament announced 90,000 convictions for cannabis offenses in the first 5 years, representing 99% of all drug arrests and disproportionately affecting Black South Africans. Drug control machineries extended the power of apartheid's political surveillance. Under these prohibitions, informal entrepreneurs extended cannabis production. Trade was enabled through corrupt relationships, and accumulations of criminal capital and power survived beyond the 1994 transition to shape the new democracy. South Africa's most famous injecting drug user was the poet and naturalist Eugene Marais, born in 1871 and dying in 1936. Claimed by Afrikaner nationalism, his lifelong addiction to morphine presented a sticking point for heroic ethnic narratives. In his 1974 biography of Marais, The Dark Stream, author Leon Rousseau addressed Marais' habit in ways that evidence some sympathy and also fascination, casting him within a European fraternity of opium-using literary figures such as De Quincey, Coleridge, and Baudelaire. Rousseau portrays Marais as a brilliant but abject individual whose cycles of use and brief periods of abstinence drove the plot of his life. Similarly, in the 1977 film The Guest, scriptwriter and leading actor Athol Fugard fully focused on Marais the addict. It recounts his temporary accommodation in a remote Highveld farm belonging to a family of pious Afrikaans-speaking Calvinists. Marais' doctor has transported him here to be cured of addiction through isolation and a tapered supply. The treatment goes poorly. Fugard's Marais is desperate and hostile, isolating himself, yelling, trying to run away, extracting servitude to his needs from the bewildered family members. Filmmaker Ross Devenish turns the story on repeated late-night scenes illuminated by a single candle, a medium of Marais' injecting routine. We see him crush the tablets in the spoon he holds over the flame, the glint off the metal surface of the syringe. As he expertly ties up and delivers the substance into his vein, we are shown a face collapsing in relief. Cut to the next frame. At the window, barely visible by candlelight, a baboon peers into the room, relating to us perhaps that addiction dehumanizes a person, reversing the direction of evolution itself. In 21st century South Africa, heroin substances like nyope have convened a derogatory terminology for its users. This name-calling evokes lower forms of animals and insect life, parasites, and the flies that come for the bodies of the dead. They are in the USA, in the state of Oregon, in 2014, and they are walking through a public park at twilight in the misty rain, talking again about what is to be done. Another 28 days in a treatment center, Outpatient care. He is an expert on his condition and on the heroin he injects. There is no information, no knowledge that he does not already possess. Along the wet pavement, there are waterlogged earthworms trapped in the puddles. While walking, he is continually bending down to rescue them, to place them where they might return to the soil. Will fentanyl arrive in South Africa? There is reason to be concerned, although the evidence to date around certain claims remains speculative. Reports of positive testing among certain individuals have been questioned for methodological accuracy. Given the North American epidemic, alarmist voices here may feel justified in their sensationalism. But critical scrutiny and calm are essential to discourage prejudicial reaction. It is likely that the question for South Africa is not whether it is possible to keep fentanyl out of circulation, but rather how to shape a response that reduces potential harms. In January this year, the editors of the medical journal, The Lancet, noted that 20% of the global prison population is incarcerated for drug offenses. The so-called war on drugs has failed, editors wrote. They continued. The disastrous impact of punitive attempts at complete drug elimination have been felt most keenly by society's most vulnerable individuals. If the purpose of drug policy is to reduce health and social harms, we have severely botched our response. We must drastically amend our approach. The Lancet endorsed empirical approaches of harm reduction, advocated by activists for years. The motto of harm reduction is "Come as you are." It does not require abstinence for continued engagement, care, and acceptance. Harm reduction is a pursuit of social justice. But as Helen Keane has argued, this is a pursuit not easily centered within a discourse of rights. Users and non-users bring competing claims to the social contract, often related to issues of public space, property, and security from different social positions. Moreover, our linguistic resources are impoverished in these matters. The experience of addiction forms the inhabited knowledge of a person using drugs. Yet the gold standard for defining addiction resides in the vocabulary of juridical protocols and medical science. Many activists and researchers have demonstrated that taking seriously the expertise of users themselves is crucial for efficacious policy and treatment. Listening and flexibility are everything. It's 2024, a hot June summer in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. She's come to stay for a couple weeks. The lounge is humming as she enters at the front door, a sound that widens to a roar. The air is acrid, like a smelter. By the window, a complicated tangle of aluminum ducts and an extractor fan have been assembled to air out the room. An air purifier also hums in the corner. She knows what it's all for, but does she? Meanwhile, he's welcoming her, toweling his hair, wet from a shower, looking beautiful in fresh clothes. He watches her perceive the fan. To cool the house, he explains, but then shrugs and smiles in response to her look. They now share the understanding that his aim is to remove the opioid fumes, which he inhales off of tin foil heated with a lighter. It's a new consumption method because he hopes, perhaps with some truth, that it's safer than injecting. His routine over the day and into the night makes his privacy incontinent. They have learned by now that the truth between them is the only way to nurture meaningful connection. One truth is that heroin is no longer available in Oregon, and that fentanyl is ubiquitous. This is a demanding drug, rapidly metabolized. Another truth is that his gesture to clean the air was not an attempt to deceive, nor to avoid her censure. He sought to make the living space tolerable, to allow her in. To make this visit possible, his habits must change and bend and adapt. He's genuinely glad to see her, happy to make that possible. They sit outside and talk for hours, catching up, laughing, planning, philosophizing, joking, feeling joy in being together. He disappears for some minutes and again reemerges. They talk more, long into the evening. Come as you are. They've adopted this motto of harm reduction between them, each of them. Sometimes it means familiar conflict, an emotional cycle of words, but it returns to acceptance and to practical strategies about the quality of life. Each remains hopeful that this is not a forever way of being and relating. There have been successful sobriety and of medication-assisted treatment, as well as every iteration of hope, fear, and shame. She knows that each early stage of sobriety is dangerous and not merely difficult. In recovery models of treatment, the idea of tough love was once a kind of law, and so-called rock bottom moments were claimed as a meritorious tool. Yet at best, results are shown to be uneven. Research demonstrates that the stability of love and not toughness can make the difference. Over 17 years, they have learned together that connection and trust are everything. In this time of fentanyl, the French philosopher Simone Weil may be helpful. Before she died in 1943 at the age of 34, Weil was concerned with the violences of war, of rejection, and of inequality. For her, rights-based pursuit for justice appeared inherently scuppered by the required contests of power between unequal parties, unequal in relation to the capacities of command and to material necessity. Placed against states of affliction, which affronts progressive assertions of dignity as the core of personhood, is, in Weil's treatment, its central challenge. Affliction draws our attention back to the shape of the world and to the unevenness of our human struggle to live in it. Weil's concern is worthiness, what she deploys as the sacred. It does not require equality so much as mutuality. The sacred is invested in an encounter between human souls. She writes, "There is in each human something sacred, but it is not his person, nor is it the human person. It is he, this human, plain and simple. Sacredness exists precisely in our invincible expectation that good and not harm will be done to us. It is revealed when a heart cries out when met with injury." Thinking with Weil, we can say that states of affliction do not reside in any capacity of a drug substance to reduce an individual from the worthiness of love. Because what we call addiction in the time of fentanyl cannot but manifest as a state of affliction, does not reduce a human being to something less than this human being. As two of her translators observe, Simone Weil's conception of justice requires an unending of care for the needs of every person. This is a bracing approach that Weil herself recognized as an absurdity, easily rejected by rational people on reasonable grounds. It may be easier to embrace her ideal of justice by its other name, love. Love recognizes that reaching into a state of affliction is not a response to the abstract personhood of an individual, nor can we expect meaningfully to connect with something in another human being. For example, something called their potential, an aspirant version of their worthiness, which, except for their drug-addicted state, they would realize and thus earn our love. There are no guarantees for any particular outcome in the time of fentanyl. But the form of justice seeking that Simone Weil conceptualizes, this leaning in towards possibility, this search for good and beauty in the meeting of human souls, this expression of love, may be precisely what we exist for. In his catalog of color, Derek Jarman also wrote, "For blue, there are no boundaries or solutions. Time is what keeps the light from reaching us. The image is a prison of the soul. Your heredity, your education, your vices and aspirations, your qualities, your psychological worlds. I have walked behind the sky. For what are you seeking? The fathomless blue of bliss. And I myself, I went up to the forest spring to find you. Only months ago, you had created a usable water source from its steady flow. These objects are yet at work: the intake pipe, screen, pump, filter, gravel. I listen to the luminous sound of water as the evening light pours through Douglas fir, oak, pine, and ash, lit up to golden. Their aura surrounded me like a revelation. You were not there. You were everywhere. And all times are one. All times are one. All times are one."
There is in each human something sacred. This is the French philosopher Simone Weil from her essay, The Person and the Sacred, which we heard quoted in the evening's lecture. Weil is relaying what her years of scholarship as a philosopher and her own experience of suffering has revealed to her about existence. What makes us human, she argues, is not specific to everyday practice, but rather to our capacity to suffer in a world we cannot control. In these later years, Weil's writing became more poetic and meditative, much like the inaugural lecture we heard this evening. In her lecture, Professor Thembisa Waetjen similarly fashions many years of her historiographical pursuits into a contemplative inquiry around the sacred. The language is intimate, warm and open, colorful and vulnerable. The style shuffles scenes playfully like a game of cards, or more soberly like a requiem. In drawing us into the sacred as a concept, she suggests how writing history becomes a personal practice of contemplation. One no different from the aura that follows smoking cannabis or inhaling opiate fumes. As we have heard in the following praise poem, it relays what happens after smoking cannabis. Quote, "We consume it and remember the miracles of the world. We remember the people. We remember those near and those far. We remember." Unquote. Yet this practice of imaginative and intentional remembering, of reconstructing lives and communities is not only the high of the edict, it is also precisely the craft of the historian. A turn to the theme of the sacred in a scholar's later writings is not unusual in the humanities. Consider Emil Durkheim's Forms of Religious Life, Martin Heidegger's essay Building, Dwelling, Thinking, J.M. Coetzee's novel Elizabeth Costello, and of course Vey's essay above. Through her inaugural lecture this evening, Thembisa Waetjen cements her place in this esteemed genealogy of writers and thinkers. In these scholars' works, Waetjen included, these evocative experiments with style and language subvert the expectations and stretch the boundaries of each their discipline to pursue what they each consider the foundational purpose of the humanities. In different ways, they reveal this purpose as to investigate the dilemma that only being is mediated by a reflexive awareness of other objects, landscapes, insects and animals, rocks, plants, and most significantly, other entities like ourselves, other human beings. In other words, we depend on something else or someone else outside of ourselves to possess each our own selfhood. These objects are both real and imagined, as the human brain remembers the past and anticipates the future. As a historian, Thembisa Waetjen has described how substances like cannabis, opium, and synthetic opioids emerge and impinge upon social practice, not least in the making of hierarchies of difference like race. She has explored their economic and political role as trade goods, the legal and racial conundrums of their regulation and policing, as well as histories of their intersections with pharmaceutical and other medical sciences. Not only in this evening's lecture, but in different ways throughout her work, as scholar, teacher, and activist, she makes the compelling argument that the form of embodiment we today call addiction does not exclude the addict from the qualities that mediate a human existence. On the contrary, the body of the addict, the chemical alterations to his biological constitution, illuminate vividly the unique social procedures that make us human. As a historically constituted practice, addiction is not only a complicated social relationship with a drug object, but one that heightens and amplifies the awareness of other objects. What is aura in her conception of the experience, other than how the body facilitates, illuminates, and amplifies objects in relation to which we can each become ourselves? If a human being only exists in relation to other entities, say another person, a landscape, a memory, or a blue fentanyl tablet, then how fragile we are, how wretchedly vulnerable, if the thing that mediates our existence lies and will always lie outside of us. It means we cannot control what has the power to transform us. The life of objects, as the simple plant, the opium poppy, has shown, are historical and contingent. It means what makes our existence as human beings is unpredictable, unstable, and always fragile. Will we embrace our vulnerability as a sacred ritual in contemplation, meaning through our scholarship in the humanities? Or will we turn knowledge towards the enterprise of unreflexive control through science, technology, and positivist epistemologies? This evening, I'm greatly honored to express my unqualified admiration to Professor Thembisa Waetjen as a scholar who invites us to pause and to embrace writing history. In fact, each our different vocations as scholars in the humanities as a contemplative practice on the dilemmas and fragilities of our human nature. I'm deeply moved by the argument, made subtly and compellingly, that what qualifies us, first and foremost, to break bread together as a congregation of scholars, What makes us worthy is each our own unique experience of humanness, happiness and suffering, loss and enduring love. Thank you.
Wow. I'm even afraid to say something because sometimes you spoil things by trying to say something. In my language, we'll say "ano uwile," which means you have spoken, right? Our honored guests, we have come now to the end of the formal formalities. Thanks, Professor Camila Naidu, our dean today. Thanks, Professor Kumisho Moharane. No, I'm seeing into the future. Dr. Kumisho Moharane and Professor Thembisa Waetjen. It was a special evening today. Very, very special. When we leave here, you are invited to go to the lounge where you came from for some light refreshments. Thank you very much for honoring this occasion with your presence. It's the end.